As we are talking about soul ties, especially those ungodly soul ties that are created in sexuality between two people or more people, we have to give a kind of definition of what is sex. Some people feel very uncomfortable about it. I noticed that very often people feel very uncomfortable in church when the subject is addressed, while at the same time there's so many accidents and so many disasters coming by sexuality, even in church, but people avoid to talk about it. So I will trespass those taboo boundaries and go straight to the subject. What is sexuality? Sometimes even my translators have a problem properly translating what I mean. So when we talk about sex, our thought is about intercourse, husband and wife, and there's a word, the word penetration. The man enters the woman. And we think that is actually sex, and everything outside that penetration is not sex. That's a very wrong definition. You know, sometimes young people come to me, they want to get married, and she's already pregnant. And then they tell me, yes, Pastor, it was like an accident. We didn't want to have sex, but suddenly we had no clothes on. And then I answer, well, you probably already had 3 hours of sex before you lost control and had no clothes on. What is sex? Sex is any action that produces sexual arousal. I mean, I've been married for 33 years. I am not a child. So I know what happens if two people kiss one another on the mouth. They press their bodies together, even standing with clothes on. I know what happens in the male body. You know, blood pressure goes up, you get an erection. I do not exactly know what a woman feels because I'm not a woman, but I know I will feel aroused. So if I press my body against a female body, holding her, rubbing her, holding her tight, a very tight hug, kissing on the mouth, what is happening to me? And that is sex. I'm having sexual arousal, and that is already called sex by my definition. Any action that causes sexual stimulation, sexual arousal, is a sexual act. So things like hands under the clothes, touching the breast of the woman, touching her private part, a woman touching your private part, those kind of things. Oral sex, some people think that's not even sex when there's oral sex. When you do something with your tongue or with your mouth, okay. Every action that produces sexual excitement, sexual arousal, is an act of sex. And the actual penetration is just a culmination of all of that. Then there's the orgasm on the side of the man, and he thinks that that's it. No, it started long before. So we are talking about demons. Well, let's first talk about the unclean spirits. The unclean spirits. So surely, as soon as you start as a man touching a woman, or as a woman touching a man in such a way that there's all kind of arousal, all kind of feelings, even if you refrain for sharing the bed, unclean spirits are there. You feel lust coming on. And so it's unclean spirits because it's outside marriage. And it's deliberately. I mean, it's not that you go to a beach and see a beautiful woman and feel a bit excitement, but this is, you're looking for this. You're touching one another because you want to, and you want to have that excitement. So that's already a sexual act. And surely at that moment, unclean spirits start entering your life, and the soul tie starts developing. And the further you go, like hands under the clothes, touching private parts, the worse it gets. The worse it gets. And so for people experimenting with this and thinking that as a teenager you can do this and it has no consequences because you can't get pregnant, and that is not sex. It is. So unclean spirits and the other spirits involved, like the contamination with occult spirits from that other person, that spirits, if that woman happens to have an abortion, the spirits of death and the punishment of death is already invading your life when you start causing sexual arousal. I think it's very important that we define sexuality in a proper way, and that when you're young or old and you are widowed or free and you start seeing someone, you start dating someone, that you realize there's a moment you engage in sex. Just having a cup of coffee, looking in the eyes of the other person, making a joke, laughing, trying to find common grounds, that is not sex. But as soon as you start touching one another at places that you don't want a stranger to touch, things are happening and you're engaging in sex. You'll find that once you have been kissing and touching and you have a split up, that it's already very painful because there is already a soul tie. You'll find that when the relationship breaks, even if you never had intercourse, you already feel that and you feel how strong a soul tie can be. So please be careful, be moderate. Do not produce sexual excitement during the time of engagement. And so I don't want to be a purist, like, oh, this is forbidden, that is forbidden, that is not forbidden. But the way you touch one another should suit the situation of process that you're in. Of course, when you already made a commitment and you are engaged and you already planned a wedding date, it might be quite okay to kiss each other on the mouth, which you should not do before that time. So it's not about introducing new laws, it's just showing how things work. So we have to talk now a bit about involuntary sex. Involuntary sex. So we can use the word rape. Today, most modern governments have new laws that tell us that even within the marriage, you can rape your partner if you force her to have sex against her will. That's already called rape. Of course, those things can happen to young people that are in love with one another, that one demands, the other one doesn't want, and you force yourself upon the lady. Sometimes it's the other way around, and the woman wants something that the man, in fact, doesn't want yet. He's not ready for it. Of course, there are involuntary actions that come under the name of incest. So older brothers, stepbrothers, touching their younger sisters and stepsisters. So those things happen, we call that incest. But anyway, we're talking about involuntary sex in which one of the partners is totally involuntary, wants to escape, but is in some way restrained by some kind of violent action and is raped. What happens to that person? Well, there's not a soul tie that consists of love and affection. There might be a kind of soul tie of fear. There's surely a spirit of fear coming upon the victim. And surely unclean spirits from that person are coming over the victim. So if a man touches a woman involuntarily, he brings unclean spirits over her if they don't have a relationship and she doesn't want this. So we have plenty of examples. Well, I will give you an example. There was this woman, she's in her 40s, and so it's situated in Africa, where people are pretty poor. So she shared one mattress with her brother because they just have little space. And at that point, she is 6 years old and her older brother is 14. And so during the night, he starts touching his little sister all over. And at some point, it comes to a penetration. And she is only 6. She has no idea what it is all about. It's for her, it's extremely painful. And she doesn't know what is happening to her. But what does happen is that she is infected with unclean spirits. And so her whole sexuality gets confused and it has a strong effect on her life later. I will explain that. When she is 12, they live in a small village. Everybody knows everybody. She comes in the house of her aunt and uncle. Her aunt is not at home. And her uncle just grabs her and rapes her. She is 12, and he threatens her, if you tell anyone, I will tell some lies about you, and you will be sorry that you told anyone. So she feels very ashamed because by that time she has some idea what sex is about. And so she feels very humiliated by what her uncle did to her, and she has no courage to tell anyone. So at some point, she confesses to one of her aunties what happened, and the auntie is shocked. He says, but we all know that your uncle is HIV positive, so immediately you have to go to the hospital and have a test. And she was lucky because she was tested negative, so she was not infected. She said, but after that, I had the spirit of lust and I slept with every man that I liked and every man that wanted me. So that's how she identified the result of these rapes. After that, I had the spirit of lust. She was by nature not a promiscuous woman. It was not her intention to live like that. But something had happened to her after her uncle raped her, after the experience with her older brother. Something happened to her. And so her whole sense of sexuality was perverted. And she ended up, well, let's say, as a prostitute, just sleeping with everyone. And having no conscience about it, no idea that this was wrong. Of course, everything changed when she became a believer. But she needed deliverance. She needed deliverance from that spirit of lust that came on her because of the behavior of other people. I have another example of this. I just explained to you what is sexuality and what is not. And so when I was teaching this, after the meeting, a woman came to me and she said, well, I always believed that I was not abused. But you opened my eyes. I have been abused for most of my life. She said, my mother died when I was a child, maybe 8 years old. And so my father would ask me to masturbate him. So I had to touch his penis, rub it until he ejaculated. Sorry for the words, but I have to explain it. And so even later, when in church sexuality was dealt with, I thought, well, I've never been abused. I just used my hand to touch my father, that was it. And that continued for many, many years. The time I met her, she was already 40. She never got married because a spirit, an unclean spirit that was on her, in her case, it prevented her from getting married. Don't know exactly how that works, but mostly the effect of unclean spirits on a man or a woman has the result that that the sexuality is affected. Whether there is too much sexuality, so it's like a spirit of lust, or there is a kind of frigidity that I don't want sexuality, or I don't want a man, or even from the side of men, they don't find that woman attractive because there's something on her that's weird. She said, my father forced me to do that for many, many years. And I always had the opinion I was not abused. Suddenly I realized that. So when I started ministering, those unclean spirits left her. But before they left, they show an expression on her face an expression of fear. They never had expected this white guy from Holland to discover their secret. They thought they could stay with this woman and have a claim on her as long as she lived, and so she would never get married, never have a husband, because she was at the dominion of this unclean spirit. And the moment someone brought light in the situation and explained that she was abused, that's in fact, she was not raped in that way, but she was sexually abused, and that unclean spirit had to leave. The spirits were surprised and shocked that they had to leave. They left. She was a different person after that. So very often in the family, incest, brothers and sisters, stepbrothers, stepsisters, they play doctor on one another. And I'm not now talking about the children of the age of 5 that boys have never seen a naked girl, girls have never seen a naked boy, or those kind of, that very childish interest in the other sex. That's not what I mean. But when a more adult person, a person that's, 14, touching a younger sister, rubbing her, feeling, that brings a lot of unclean spirits and spirits of perversion that can have deep effects on the life of a woman or a man later. Now it's more like, okay, what is the effect on women? So I also want to talk about the effect on men. So a man came in our ministry and he was very nervous. He said, if anyone finds out what is my problem, I'll probably be expelled from my church. And I said, well, our ministry is confidential, so you can speak out. He said, I was 7 years old and my neighbor raped me. There was an anal penetration. And of course, it was painful, but I didn't really know what happened. But the result of that was a complete confusion. So I started doubting myself. Who am I? Am I a heterosexual? Am I a homosexual? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me that this happened? And he said the strange thing is, and sorry about the details, but once you minister, you will face such situations. He said, I am masturbating, and when I'm masturbating, I'm thinking about man. And at the same time, I'm in love with a woman in our church. So on one hand, I would like to have a wife and marry a woman. And on the other hand, my fantasy goes with man. I said, well, that's what happened to you. A homosexual man raped you with a spirit, an unclean spirit with homosexual characteristics. Well, let's call it a homosexual unclean spirit. He raped you, and that spirit jumped on you, and it perverted your whole sexuality. Of course, it's the best when we could deal with those things at a young age, just after it happened, when we could bring deliverance to children as soon as something happened. That would be better, because if you wait another 20 or 30 or 40 years before someone speaks about it, before someone has the courage to speak about it, that particular unclean spirit that came by rape will have shaped the whole character. It will have grown into the personality and cause that kind of deep changes, perversion, that even casting out that spirit is not enough, and that person surely needs a lot of mentoring, help, and love after that. Amen.